Welcome to The State of It. I'm Brandon Ashplant and this is Gabby Hartfield, and we're joined by a new host.
Hi, my name is Jasmine, and not only am I new, but so is our new news segment. From now on, Brandon, Jasmine and I are going to bring a story from the news and debate it from 3 different perspectives.
Who is the new Brexit secretary?
Stephen Barclay. Okay, so it's me. It's my news piece this week. Okay, so this is a local news story, and it's quite a controversial one. So the government could perform a major U-turn on the disproportionate number of asylum seekers that come to Greater Manchester after local leaders threatened to stop accepting the asylum seekers, and notably Andy Burnham was at the forefront of this.
So which government actually brought in
this policy? So this was the Labour government of the Tony Blair era, so this was the Tony Blair government. So a sixth of the asylum seekers that come in and are accepted refugee status come to Greater Manchester without extra public funding to help provide their care needs, because they're essentially coming with nothing.
Right.
Perhaps from war-torn countries, I don't know. And the government isn't giving any extra funding to this area, and that puts a lot of pressure on the local council, obviously. Mm-hmm. So the local council ends up putting them in poor areas, and that just creates almost like a ghettoisation,
Right. So is it true that there's 4 places in Greater Manchester that are actually in the top 10 councils in the country?
Yes, so I think was it Oldham, Rochdale?
Yeah, Bolton and Manchester.
Yes, yeah.
What about the rest of the country? Where are they being sent otherwise?
Well, that's the thing. None of them go to the southwest. So there's 180 constituencies, most of which are home counties and in the southwest, that receive no asylum seekers, and the PM's constituency is one of them. They receive no asylum seekers.
Interesting.
Yeah, it is. So this, because essentially it's so expensive, the asylum seekers that are fleeing with nothing wouldn't be able to afford to live there. So the cheapest places in the UK are taken over, not taken over, but they're basically given a load of refugees, and they can't. It's very unsustainable.
Essentially, I think what Andy Burnham's trying to put across is that we've got a lot of homelessness problems, a lot of poverty problems within Greater Manchester. I don't see him kind of rejecting asylum seekers as such. I see him more as kind of being like, look, we've got so much poverty already, and there's so many other counties, like you say, like Theresa May's county, who don't take any. Yeah, exactly. So I kind of see his policy not against asylum seekers, just more actually kind of with them, and understanding that the standard of living will increase if they're kind of dispersed, I don't like to use, but kind of situated elsewhere in the country, so that public funds can be spread out further.
So, did he mention anything about the funding and how
so
there should be an increased maybe?
So his argument is that we don't have a problem taking such a number of migrants in, but we need to have extra funding. We can't, it's unsustainable. So we don't mind the migrants, and the asylum seekers, refugees, whatever, but we have to have more funding. It can't just be the onus on the council to find the money out of,
Yeah, that's understandable, because otherwise everyone gets affected really, in a bad way.
But from my point of view, I agree with that, and obviously the UK, I think, has a moral duty to take in genuine refugees, obviously, but I don't think they should all be coming to one region, and that's primarily for integration purposes. If you're sending, even if they get extra funding, so even if Greater Manchester gets extra funding, you still end up with a degree of ghettoisation, because you're still going to have people coming into, let's say, Oldham, and not particularly wealthy or affluent areas, and they can't move out of a certain poverty line because there's only poor people being brought into the area. So I think it should be more, like you said, a distributed thing, integration across the country, and I think there needs to be more of a policy of bringing.
I think of integration.
But bringing people into the southwest. I don't think, just saying it's not there. It's too expensive. I don't think that cuts it for me.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, being in the UK for the amount that I have, I know there's already this north and south divide. Yeah. There's a cultural divide already within. So bringing refugees in and only situating them in one region kind of emphasizes and makes this gap even more, and creates multiple layers of cultural divides. And I mean, my question on the article and on Burnham's point is, does he just want to redistribute? Because it's one thing to really distribute and to kind of create opportunities for refugees in better conditions and better environments as well. But there's another thing to really emphasize the fact that when you are bringing people in, there's so much money and so much resources needed to really be able to rehabilitate them and to give them the best opportunity. And the question is, if refugees were to be given to like other areas, what type of resources are actually going to be provided for them so that they can actually live? Like, let's say they say, okay, we're not going to, like, let's say if Manchester says, we're not going to take in any more refugees because we have too many populations and not enough funding, and then basically because of that, and if the South doesn't accept anymore, then what we're really doing is essentially shutting our borders.
Exactly, yeah. Well,
exactly.
you're increasing the divide between North
Right,
and South. Yeah.
and if no extra income goes into, yeah.
Exactly, that's my point. You end up with almost like a ghettoization, and
Exactly.
the poorest stay poor, the richest stay rich.
Right,
You know.
and that kind of emphasizes kind of this posh South
Yes,
stereotype.
yeah. Well, they don't.
Well,
you know,
the councils aren't prepared down south to bring in kind of, the charities, whether it's homelessness charities or whether it's, bigger benefits, more integration within their society. I think each county, has different priorities, and just it happens to be the ones down south, because they don't see the problem of immigration, they don't see the problem, they don't see the necessity to bring in these organisations that will actually help asylum seekers integrate into a community. So I think ultimately, I don't know whether it's better to kind of bring them in, have the problem of a lack of resources within the county, whether it be down south or it be other counties in the UK. I don't know whether it's better to have the problem and then for it to be fixed rather than fixing the problem first, because I just think you're going to struggle to argue against council members and say this is what we need when there's no proof that we need it yet.
Wait, I'm a bit confused. Could you
Okay.
elaborate?
Yes.
Are you saying that refugees should be or should not be dispersed?
I think they should be dispersed. And I'm saying I think you should do it before you actually say to the councils, look, we need all these resources for all these organisations that are going to help integrate them.
Really?
Because I don't think there's any other way I honestly don't think there's any other way to convince other parts of the country that it's necessary to, to change their budget. I know where I live, the Citizens Advice Bureau has literally just been completely unfunded. And in Manchester, that wouldn't suffice because there's so many, especially asylum seekers, that rely on getting legal advice from these kind of organisations. And I know that in Suffolk we have barely any asylum seekers. I don't even know if we have any. And I think that policy wouldn't have been shut down if we did have some there and we saw the necessity to keep it.
Right, so basically you're saying that if we were to distribute the refugees across the country, it would create it would light the flame to get more funding and resources available.
I think it's a bit of a stick.
Okay,
it's to
pushing it.
Yeah, 100%.
So it's like a chicken and egg situation. You don't know which should come first.
But that might necessarily work because basically we might be exacerbating the problem, taking people in poor neighbourhoods in poverty-ridden areas and just put them in other poverty-ridden areas in the south because it's not like they don't exist. And what we're doing, if we get a lot of people coming in and living in a lifestyle and a culture that is different already, that already has created a separation, and if we don't provide any resources, any ways of rehabilitating them, any ways of necessarily helping them assimilate or understand British culture, then really we're alienating them. And then to take this alienation and this idea of okay, I don't belong, I'm in a bad neighborhood, I don't have any opportunities, I don't even know how British culture works, no one's telling me about it, and then just taking the problem and spreading it out elsewhere instead of actually finding the core of the issue, that won't fix anything.
Yeah, but then But I think that solution of distributing and redistributing is the solution to what is essentially ghettoization problem, where you alienate immigrants or asylum seekers, whatever, who come to the country, who want to assimilate. As soon as you put them all together in some place in Manchester, some poor neighbourhood in Manchester, then they're not being brought into British culture and British livelihood.
Well, okay, but then we don't want to separate any people out from their culture and their
Of course, you don't want to strip
people
people
of
of their culture.
them of their communities. They can have communities.
But people can retain their culture whilst living in a multicultural environment.
Exactly.
And like you say, your kind of the thoughts about the north and the south divide. I think, like you were saying, it pushes the divide when people from the south, and I know that people from the south just associate the north, especially Manchester, with immigration, and you don't want that because you want them to see it firsthand. And I think the issue that we're coming to, and the reason we're disagreeing, is because the policy that I'm kind of suggesting about kind of dispersing first and then sorting out the monetary policies will affect people in a negative way, but ultimately will solve a bigger
Social
issue.
problems,
Yes, bigger social issue. I think that's why we're arguing more based on like the initial change is going to be tougher.
But I think, right, there is a problem by overcrowding people and putting them in a particular area. Like, that needs to be solved and it needs to be distributed. I mean, I agree to that point, but I think we can't separate it. If we separate it and we say first this, then that, then we're basically saying that this is more important to do than provide the money and the rehabilitation center. And that creates a lot of problem because then, realistically, like psychologically speaking, you're kind of like, this is not as important. First, let's distribute them. Okay, we distribute them, but then what?
Which one would you do first?
I would both. So if you are
but I don't think that's going to happen. I don't think that's going to happen in the councils in England. Like, you're not going to convince the council to redistribute their budget, especially in a farming county like Manchester's a city. A lot of the places down south are farming counties. They have a lot of budgets based on that and based on people's incomes, like rely solely on those things. I don't think you're going to convince. I would love to be able to convince the council, but I don't think you're going to be able to convince them without actually showing a problem. They argue about 30 more houses built on a field down south. Like, they're not going to be okay with you giving a whole bunch of their budget to something that doesn't exist yet.
But I mean, okay, fair point. But then in the same way, like, let's say if every like constituency gives, I'm just gonna make like £5. This is not honestly.
No.
If every
hypothetically,
like, if everyone like increases their budget by £5, that's not as extreme as, let's say, one county, let's say Manchester, instead of before distributing them, right? Because I'm not suggesting that we like increase the funding and then distribute, because to increase the funding to make it okay in Manchester would be like huge amount of
it's
sums
all about
needed.
supply and demand.
It's all exactly. So like, it can happen together where if the people do get distributed and every constituency basically gives a nice amount, like, yes, there will be an increase, like I would imagine in taxes, or I'm not sure, I'm from the US tax rule, but that would be much less dramatic than like one constituency being told, okay, now you need to like build up all the money for your...
So you like disperse the funding.
So you disperse the funding.
But
so
again, there's still losers in every way you do it, because if you lose the budget, if you kind of don't give Manchester the funding that they need, there's going to be losers within Manchester. If you don't give the other counties funding you need and send them there, there's going to be losers there. I think ultimately it's something, because that shift needs to be honest, in my opinion, so dramatic, because it's really not working at this point. There's going to be people affected in a negative way. I think it's just deciding which way that's going to happen.
Right, but then once you've convinced, and we're all on the same wavelength, that the South needs to take more, and there needs to be general redistribution or better distribution policy, how do you convince councils to take in, to accept a problem that isn't on their doorstep yet?
Right. So if you're suggesting that no change is necessarily going to be made on increasing the budget for the immigration, so then aren't you then saying that this catastrophe is basically then going to be taken from Manchester and applied like a micro catastrophe here, micro catastrophe there, like micro problem here? And so if nobody actually is willing to give money, then that reiterates my point of, okay, we distribute them, then no one's willing to ever give the money. If they're not willing to give it now.
Equally, how else are they going to get, like, how else are you going to convince the councils to get money? I think the only way to convince councils to get the money is if Manchester wouldn't decide just to give a load of money to like public housing and stuff like that if it wasn't necessary. It's not like Manchester wouldn't put aside a load of money for crops like Suffolk or like other counties in East Anglia do, because they don't need to. Whereas if suddenly half of Manchester became a field, then they would need to. I think it's just like trying to convince them, and the only way to do that, unfortunately, is to distribute refugees earlier.
First. And then see the economic change and the policy change.
Right. Okay. So let's say we do distribute them, and then there's still not enough.
Was that redistribute?
Let's say we do redistribute them, but my whole point was that if we do redistribute the refugees coming in, that we also put a very strong emphasis on the monetary funds that need to be allocated to them. And if it's not possible, we really have to start thinking about if the UK has the capability of taking in any more refugees, because people are coming in from war-torn countries, they're coming in from terrible situations, and what's the point of being taken from one bad place and put in a poverty-stricken area with hunger and crime in another place, which then, not only are you in a bad area, like poverty-ridden, but now you have all of the stereotypes attached to you, all of the racism that you're going to face, but you would not feel in your own community. So if it's not working, we have to think about, can we actually take any more refugees? And I know that's controversial, controversial, but like, what's it? Is it living the point, or actually like being alive or living?
The quality of life, yeah.
Quality of life.
That's what that's what Andy Burnham was kind of stating. He's got no problems with taking refugees in, but there needs to be the funding.
Yeah,
but you're actually saying we need to question whether we can actually take refugees in.
If the quality of life of the people coming in from like, and I'm not saying that the discrimination faced, let's say, in some parts of the UK is just as bad or worse than like war in Syria. That's not what I'm saying.
That's where the issue is, when they're running away from kind of war
Right.
and violence, then it's like...
But we have to really think about like actually like, because it's like, if you take on more than you can chew.
Yeah.
Like actually, if you take, let's say, I'm just saying 10 people and really make their lives better and really like assimilate them and have part of their culture, like integrate with like British culture, and great, they're contributing to the economy, everyone's happy. But then if you take a huge influx that you can't handle, that you literally don't have enough money for.
I think like the issue is that we do have enough money, it just depends on the government, and the fact that the government isn't willing to,
How
the
it's being
councils...
organised and distributed, yeah.
Exactly, like we have the money, I'm not going to take the argument that we don't have the money.
So then
I think we do, and it's the matter of what government's in power, unfortunately.
So then we need to distribute the money properly just as much as we distribute the people. Thank you for watching this State of It.
Make sure you let us know your thoughts.